And we have a national champion. Indiana beats Miami by the score of 27-21. I'm Steve. I'm with Under Further Review. And before we get into the full recap of the national championship game, going to try to make this one a quick one today. And then we're going to get into the off season, talk about some of the, early top 25 teams, the transfer portal. We'll talk about the NFL draft. There's a lot coming your way, but in the meantime, today's episode, the full purpose of it is for the national championship game that happened in Miami against Miami, Indiana facing off against Miami. And before I get into it, I just want to throw out my usual spiel. Follow us on the social media pages, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, under further review. If you just search our name, we should pop up. And that's the same with YouTube. If you don't mind, if you like what we do, if you enjoy listening to us, watching us, if you enjoy our college football coverage and our NFL draft coverage that's going to be coming your way, then throw us a subscription because all the help we can get, it really goes a long way. So thank you for watching. And let's begin. Let's start talking about Indiana because this was such a magical fairy tale run ever since Curt Cignetti took over and came to Indiana from James Madison University, where I'll throw this out there. He was making $475,000 a year at James Madison University. And I saw a stat. Now he's making north of 13 million this season, something like along those lines. So a huge jump at the time. So he 64 right now. So he probably got the position at 62. A lot of people deemed it as an older coach finally getting a chance. Didn't know if it was going to work out. I think that was just for people who didn't know much about Cignetti because anyone who ever played under Cignetti knew he was a true competitor. And what you saw during this bowl season, during the playoff run, that's full blown Curt Cignetti right there. That's who he is. It was so nice to see him finally smile last night once the game concluded and that pressure just came off and he finally had a victory under his belt, a national championship he brought to Indiana, who's been playing college football for 139 years now. 139 years. And for the longest time, they were just known as a bad football team. Never really had too much to hang their hat on. Now they have a national championship, and I couldn't be happier for that school, for that program. It's just, you can see the passion. You saw it during the bowl games when they had 60-70% of the stadium covered compared to rival fans or the opposing competition's fans. And you saw it last night in Miami. So Miami was quote unquote the home team because that was in their backyard. And I think it was like around 60, maybe the highest 70% Indiana fans there. So they traveled well, they backed up their team, and now they have a championship. So let's talk about this. Like I said, for the longest time, Indiana was known as a basketball school. Not so much anymore. I mean, the basketball team's been wavering. Some years they have good years, some years they're 500. So starting to probably is a football school now. I was going to say starting to creep into football territory. It is a football school now. It has a national championship, and Curt Cignetti's not going anywhere. I mean, winning record last year, another winning undefeated season this year, and a national championship. But before Cignetti came, they had Tom Allen, and his final 3 years at Indiana, they went 2-10, 4-8, 3-9. Man, some bad years, and we saw it that they were the joke of the Big Ten. Whenever a team had them on their schedule, they kind of knew that a win was coming. It was an easy week. Oftentimes, Indiana got overlooked for what was next after and beyond Indiana. But then Indiana made the choice. They hired Cignetti. And like I said, he was making $475K at James Madison University. And he was working his tail off. He always had James Madison University competitive. And from the start, his dream was to pack Memorial Stadium. And we saw the viral picture going around. I'm just so happy that this has come into fruition for them because we did see the viral picture going around where it was an empty stadium. No one was there. And also those fans who stuck through it because while no one was there, several hundred, maybe a few thousand were in the stadium and they watched those bad years. And those people who showed up week in and week out, and I said this on my Instagram story last night, and I think I even posted it on Twitter as well. Those fans who showed up week in and week out and gave their heart to this team and just dedicated Saturday afternoons to Indiana football, knowing that they were going to lose and it was a losing brand. and probably more showing up for the players that were on the other team because, in the Big Ten, you get to see some NFL caliber players. The fact that they stuck around this team and they can finally say that they are the fans of a national championship team, that's pretty awesome too. But I mean, for a while, it was a dead zone. No one showed up, and I have to say, Memorial Stadium, it's beautiful. I've never been there before, but I recently saw a picture from a snowy game that somebody took. For some reason, it popped up on my Twitter timeline, and it was a packed house, sold out probably, and it just was like one of the coolest sports shots I've ever seen. I'm a big fan of stadium shots, like stadium photos, and that one was really cool. But the first few months, let's talk about that. Curt Cignetti basically cleaned house with his players. I think back to the story from last night with Charlie Becker because that whole wide receiver room was completely new. We know that he brought Surratt over from James Madison University, but it was all new receivers. And at one point, Charlie Becker, who was the lone man from the previous team that actually stuck around and Cignetti actually had interest in holding on to, at one point, he did enter the transfer portal. But I guess after conversation, Cignetti said, "You have a future with this Indiana team." He decided to come back in, and man, did it work out because he had a few big plays last night. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. I think for the season, he only had like one drop. It was some impressive stat, and he didn't even really get playing time the first 7 games or so. It took an injury for him to get, included in the starting lineup. But yeah, I mean, while most other Big Ten and SEC schools are full of 4-star recruits, 5-star recruits, this Indiana team, I have a stat right here. It's the blue chip ratio. The average champion, so we think back to like the Ohio States of the world, Michigan a few seasons ago, all the times Alabama won, LSU. The average team had 50% of their roster for that blue chip ratio, which was the 4-star, 5-star recruits. Indiana only had 8%. That is incredible. Cignetti really gets the most out of his teams. We talk about coaches all the time, like great hire because they get the most out of the players. This is the utmost example of being able to get the most out of your players. The fact that Cignetti, I looked before, he had the 49th, according to 24/7, he had the 49th ranked transfer portal class last year. His prized possession was Fernando Mendoza. He got Fernando Mendoza from California. Man, we'll get into Fernando Mendoza. Just a incredible season, a historic season. What he did during the college playoff run, in the Rose Bowl and in the Citrus Bowl against Oregon was just so impressive. 5 incompletions, 8 touchdowns, and more touchdowns than incompletions. I can't wait to get into him. But there was another stat. It was something like over 45 players were 4th or 5th year seniors on this team. So a veteran squad, it was most likely players that were overlooked their entire football career. And now they found a home with Indiana and they found great coaches who were able to work them up to, their highest potential. And now some of these guys have a future in professional football, whether that be in the NFL or some other league. But there's going to be a good chunk of players that are going to get looks now that they were on a national championship team. They were able to keep up with the Ohio States of the world, beat the Ohio States of the world in the Big Ten championship game. Where if you look on paper, Ohio State to me had the most talented team this season. That defense was, I've been saying it all season, one of the better defenses I've seen in my lifetime. And Indiana was able to beat them. And then this Miami defense, they weren't they weren't a joke either. They weren't something to take lightly. And at times they did give Mendoza and that Indiana offense a hard time. But Indiana, they were able to persevere. They are a resilient group. But it doesn't really stop there, the story. It just keeps going. The Heisman Trophy winning Fernando Mendoza, and we know he was on California last year. He was pretty sharp. He was a strong quarterback. I do remember when College Game Day went there last season in California or Cal, they were facing Miami and they had a lead most of the game and Mendoza was fantastic and Miami was able to overcome the hostile territory. They were on the road and they were able to overcome it and beat Cal. But that was really the moment where, like, me specifically, that's when I learned who Fernando Mendoza was. I watched that game. I stayed up for it. It was a later game. And I think that's when, like, most of the nation found out about Mendoza. I'm not saying that the nation was sitting down and fans across the country were like, "Oh, that's the future first round pick right there." But they were certainly were saying, that's a good quarterback, and if he finds the right school, maybe who knows? Maybe the ceiling, maybe he has a high ceiling, and we saw that happen with Indiana this year because now we're looking at the number one overall pick in the NFL draft. You know, the Raiders would be foolish to pass up on a program changer like Mendoza, somebody who makes all the right decisions and really rallies around his teammates. And you saw it last night when his lip was bleeding and he got in the huddle and he kind of screamed in the huddle, but it wasn't like a pissed off scream at his teammates. Why did you let the defender get there? It was kind of just letting out his emotions in the moment because he's just a true baller and he wants the football in his hands and he wants to win like that. I couldn't think of a better player for a franchise like the Las Vegas Raiders, who have year in and year out made the wrong decisions in the NFL draft. This is the right decision, and it fell right into your lap because now you have the number one pick, and you almost didn't have it because you won that final week, and maybe you beat the Chiefs because you knew the other teams lost, but you almost gave it away, and now you have the first round pick. You have to get this decision right. You tried it with Geno Smith this season. You tried to bring in a veteran quarterback. It did not work out. Fix that offensive line. Go get Fernando Mendoza. Start working forward. But Mendoza, he grew up in Miami. This is probably one of my favorite stories right here. He had visions, dreams of being the starting quarterback for Miami. And during his recruitment, I believe he was reaching out and he got overlooked. They didn't even entertain the idea of Mendoza coming to Miami. So he goes off. He eventually becomes the starting quarterback at Cal for the Golden Bears. And then, his story, he goes to Indiana. But this is the part I didn't really know. I believe either College Game Day or some broadcast said it last night. I don't know who to give credit to. I would assume it was College Game Day. But they said when he hit the transfer portal, Miami actually reached out. And I think they were interested, that they really wanted to bring him in. And I'm assuming this is before they looked at Carson Beck. And Fernando Mendoza's mom kind of stepped in and said, no, like you didn't give my son the time of day when he was coming out of high school. And this was his dream school. And we're not going to do it now. We're not going to give you the time of day now that he's being sought after by other schools. So he goes to Indiana. It was just a dream fit with Curt Cignetti, and he never looked back. Despite the efforts by the Miami Hurricanes, they do it every year. They try to sneak in during the final hour and take the top quarterbacks in the transfer portal. Now, I don't know if people considered Fernando Mendoza one of the top quarterbacks in last year's transfer portal, but he certainly, I think a lot of people knew what his talent was and what his potential was. But yeah, I mean, in this day and age with the NIL rules and what it's become and how people are kind of worried for like those smaller schools, those schools that have never won before, and how like schools like Ohio State and Alabama and LSU and Georgia and the list goes on, like Texas, like Texas Tech now. I don't know. The list just keeps going and going, but like those big time schools that have a lot of NIL funds, they're going to kind of silence those other schools because they're going to be the ones dishing out all these monster contracts and getting any player in the portal that they really want. And it felt unfortunate, and it felt like we were in such a weird time, and we still are in a weird time of like uncertain scenarios for college football. I mean, just look at the Duke quarterback, Mensa. Look what's going on with him because he's become a story where like Duke's trying to sue him now to keep him on their roster, even though, Miami snuck in during the fifth hour and it looks like they're going to succeed in getting him as their starting quarterback. So, and I think back to the Williams from Washington, and we covered that on this podcast and what that turned into. We need some feel good stories. This Indiana group and what Cignetti did, what Mendoza did, what this entire roster did is just, impressive on so many levels. I can't get over this game. It was a defensive matchup in the first half, and then it kind of low-key turned into a shootout in some ways. The offense just seemed hungry during the second half. Hungry dogs run faster. Jason Kelsey. Mendoza, he had his Heisman moment in this game. So I think the moment when we look back at this Indiana championship for years to come, and I'm sure there will be replays down the road because I remember and it pops up all the time when we get to this point of the year. The Vince Young touchdown, where he runs into the end zone. There's a bunch of other clips. Cam Newton pops up and what he did with Auburn and all that good stuff. I think Tua had a monster moment. I'm sure people play Joe Burrow's championship with LSU, even though it was a blowout, but it was just a big deal for LSU. That was one of the best teams. And I saw a lot last night on Twitter where people were trying to compare teams, and this happens every year with national championship teams where they try to rank the past national champions, at least the ones from like the past 20, 25 years or so. And LSU always falls to number one on that list. That was just such a historic roster, and it showed with even who their wide receivers were, Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, but it was just loaded from top to bottom, full of NFL talent. We'll see what happens with this Indiana team. We know that most likely the number one pick is locked. Beyond that, not too sure. Going to have to take a look and see, where their players fall. Are they day one picks, day two picks, day three picks? Are they undrafted? And that will come. But yeah, Mendoza had his Heisman moment. It was on fourth down, 4th and 5, I believe. And originally, Curt Cignetti sent out his special teams unit. He wanted to kick a field goal, but then he kind of sent out that unit late. It was like 8 seconds left on the play clock, and it wasn't going to be enough time for them to get a snap off. So he calls them back in. They call the timeout instead of pushing them back 5 yards with a penalty and just definitely having to kick the field goal. He calls the timeout and says, "Now I have a play call on the table." I think at the time they were up by 3. Really should have wrote this down in my notes, but regardless, it was a crucial moment of the game. So he sends his offense back on the field, and Miami's kind of spread out, expecting a pass. Their defense was kind of pushed back. It looked like they were ready to run a zone, I believe. Could be wrong there, but all I know is what happened on the next play. Mendoza takes the ball in shotgun. For a split second, he acts like he's going to pass, and then he tucks it under and runs QB draw, and kind of runs up the middle, and then the defense starts closing in. The one safety crashed, the other one was kind of hesitant with slowing down, and that split hesitation led to Mendoza being able to find a hole and get into the end zone. And it's such a awesome picture. If you can find it on social media, definitely look at the picture of Fernando Mendoza airborne right before he's about to take a massive hit from the Miami defense. It's one of the coolest pictures. And he didn't go full like helicopter mode, but he definitely got up there and he got hit while he was there. And it was just such an important moment. And, there was a few times I sat there last night and I was talking about Indiana football, Mendoza, Charlie Becker, some of the other players, Aiden Fisher, who I really like from that defensive line. He had a sack last night. Resilient group, just what you want from a football player, probably the perfect players to coach, and they just outwork you. That's as simple as that. As cliche as it sounds, that's the motto of this team. They're going to outwork you. And even the catch that Charlie Becker had last night, where he steps out of bounds, but at first it was called a touchdown. Most receivers, I would think, like 5 yard line, 2 or 3 defenders closing in on you, they're just going to run out of bounds. Save the body. You get hit enough, and it's understandable. And these defenders are just so big and fast now. It's like getting hit by a car. But Charlie Becker, he kind of pivoted. He brought himself back in bounds, and he dropped his shoulder and fought his way to the end zone. And I remember watching that, and I wrote down, that's the nature of this team, is what Charlie Becker just did. They don't give up. I saw it a few times with Cooper, the receiver, and I looked at clips of him throughout the season, and he doesn't go down. He just fights you to the end. And it's that type of player, like even when you're like a top-notch defense like Miami has, it's that type of player that frustrates you. Because every time they get the ball, you're in for a battle. You're going to have to give it your all to get them to the ground. So, yeah, Mendoza had his Heisman moment there. And how about this stat? There's a few stats I want to go over for Mendoza. The Hoosiers converted twice on fourth down that drive. The other one was the throw to Mendoza. Really nice catch. Not the throw to Mendoza, excuse me. The throw from Mendoza to Charlie Becker, which was a really nice catch. Kind of left it out in front of him. Not the best throw, in my opinion, but Becker just has such short hands. Indiana was just of 6 on 4th down in the 4th quarter entering that game. This was Mendoza's first touchdown of any kind on 4th down this season. So that's a fun fact. How about Mendoza too? We talk about the Heisman moment. He's the 4th Heisman winner to win a national championship since the college football playoff debuted in 2014. The other 4, Joe Burrow, Derrick Henry, or the other 3, I should say, Joe Burrow, Derrick Henry, and Devonta Smith. I can't say enough about Mendoza. He's the pulse of this team, the heartbeat, whatever you want to call it. The players around him just rally. His identity, he's just become like a folklore kinda, and I wish I had time to find a tweet, and I'm gonna try to multitask here because that there was such a fun tweet last night, and if I can find it, I will let you guys know, but I was liking stuff left and right because, I was like, Let's get some ammunition for this show. Let's get" I was keeping my own notes, I was also trying to see what other people were saying, but regardless, it was such a fun story. I want to talk Charlie Becker too. Dave Portnoy's tweet kind of reminded me of Charlie Becker because he wrote, "I don't understand Charlie Becker at all. Not a Cignetti recruit, barely played at the beginning of the year, yet he's like a cross between Jerry Rice, Puka Nakua, and Justin Jefferson." And I wrote down Charlie Becker several times in my notes. Um, this was the quote from Saint Zoe last night. "Fernando Mendoza looks like he makes his animal crackers fight each other before he eats them." I think that's uh I think that's one of the coolest tweets right there. And we see his interviews. We see, how he talks after the game. We kind of think it's like a chat GBT response, AI response. Like he was sitting in his room before the game, before he took the trip to the stadium, and he was just writing that. "Ooh, that sounds really nice. Let me write that down just in case I win," and just trying to like remember notes. How about this stat? I want to get some of these stats out of the way. Miami's 3 losses this year: SMU by 3, Beck interception; Louisville by 3, Beck interception to end it; Indiana by 6, Beck interception to end it. So yeah, and there was a lot of good ones last night. Solid QB matchup tonight for the IU versus Miami game. And it's a picture of Fernando Mendoza and Steve Buscemi. A lot of people were saying Beck looked like Buscemi. I'm not going to go there. I'm not here to talk about looks. I'm here to talk about performance. But Charlie Becker, he had a nice 4th down catch. He had a nice 3rd down catch. The 3rd down catch was like, I think that's when I was like, "Oh, man, he's got some hands." And I've seen some touchdowns in the first 2 games that he had against Alabama and Oregon, and, there was ones all the way up here where he's catching it and, like, you have to have strong hands to grab it up there and bring it back down, and last night, it was like defender's arm there. He's just putting out his hand, and somehow it's just landing in there, and he's keep holding on to it. So just great stories. Charlie Becker's another one, and I already went over his story and about how Cignetti made it a point to keep him. Indiana threw the ball 7 out of their first 10 plays. This is a team. I think Mensch said it on the Todd McShay show, and I don't know the exact numbers. I should have wrote it down, but I was driving when I was listening to their podcast today. I think they threw the ball under 400 times this year, and they ran the ball over 600 times. So this is a run first offense, despite Fernando Mendoza being their quarterback. They're looking to run the ball. They have a running back by committee back there. There's no one person that you are like sure is going to go off during a select game, but they're all really good players. But the fact that they came out and they passed it 7 out of 10 times, I think that was the game plan because now Miami's defense is kind of on their toes. And, as soon as they blitz the ball, it's kind of like a delayed handoff RPO style. And the running back's getting, 5 to 10 yards. You saw the running game start to pick it up as the game went on. That was it's like chess out there. That was like a planned attack for Indiana. Yeah, and the defense. I can't say enough about this defense either. Just watching them last night, Beck didn't have many windows to throw into. And Beck had a whole lot of time last night, and I'll talk about this a little bit once I start talking about him. But the secondary moved around so well with the receivers that there were a lot of plays that I think he felt a little uncomfortable releasing the ball to his receivers just because the window wasn't there or it was going to be heavily contested. So great job by this defense led by senior captain Aiden Fisher. And we saw the interception at the end of the game. I believe by Sharp. Yeah, Jamari Sharp had the game-winning interception. Don't know what Beck was thinking. They were crossed the 50, had 40-something seconds left, and Beck decides to air it out into double coverage, and, Sharp was right in front of the receiver, didn't have enough arm behind it, and he came down with the interception. Let's talk about Carson Beck. So, last podcast episode, I sat here and I said, if he plays the way he did against Ole Miss, I think Miami's going to have a chance. That was kind of wrong, actually. He didn't play anywhere in the ballpark of what he did against Ole Miss, especially in that final drive, which I was like, if he plays like this all the time in that final drive where he's in control, he's even ripping the ball down and running with it. He kind of looked like Fernando Mendoza out there. He's going to jump up the draft boards. Might have a Jackson Dart style rise to him. But no, he didn't really play like that, and Miami was still in it. But the reasons Miami was in it till the end, it was because of their defense, it was because of their running game, and it was because of guys like Malachi Tony, the receivers who you can throw those quick slant routes, he'll catch it, and he'll make little into nothing. I'm going to talk a little more about Tony in a bit, but I was not impressed by Beck, and it went more than his playing or what he was doing on the field. It was his body language. There was a lot of times when he was hanging his head, holding his helmet after a throw. Just he was showing his frustrations, and I think Indiana fed off of that. Is that they knew they were getting to him, and it led to mistakes like the massive one at the end of the game. So I wasn't blown away by Beck. Did he hurt himself this season? I don't think so. But did he really blow anyone away like scouts or, NFL coaches? I don't know if that's the case either. If he does come out and has a nice, pro day, he goes to the NFL Combine and he impresses people. I think he still is the number 3 quarterback on the board, but he has his work cut out for himself, and he's probably gonna have to participate in all those events. While, like, someone like Fernando Mendoza during the NFL Combine, he's probably not even gonna have to do anything except for put his feet up and watch other people get to work. So, 2 different stories on the 2 sides of the ball for the quarterback position, and I think Beck, he had the Cam Ward opportunity where he comes from Georgia, he was the starting quarterback, and then Gunnar Stockton kind of comes in, and George is like, "All right, we're gonna run with this guy. Beck, you're out of here." And Beck leaves, and he obviously went after the money. Miami has a boatload of it, and they can give it to the quarterbacks. And Miami saw the potential, and he ends up at Miami, but he didn't have that Cam Ward season, and he certainly could have. Look at Fernando Mendoza. We went into the season thinking like guys like Arch Manning and Nussmeier and Pilar from Penn State and Klubnik from Clemson, like those were going to be the guys that were going to be looked at in the first round. The Sellers, Lenore Sellers, but those aren't the guys getting looked at in the first round. It's Fernando Mendoza. We thought Dante Moore was going to be the number 2 pick. Now he's not because he's returning to Oregon. It's going to be Ty Simpson most likely. He's going to be the second quarterback off the board. It's going to be a fight for that 3rd spot. Beck has a chance. He didn't do it for me last night. This entire season, I sat there and I was like, is this really somebody that like NFL franchise really wants to bank on? I don't know. That's the decision for the scouts and the NFL teams. But I'm not going into the season. So I sat there last season when the Giants drafted Jackson Darden. I'm going to throw out there, I'm a Giants fan, so this might be a little biased, this opinion. But when the Giants did draft Jackson Dart last season, I was excited. And I watched him throughout college while he was with Ole Miss, and I know he was a little adventurous with his passes, made some tough decisions at times. He was a risk taker at the end of the day, but it's starting to work out for him in the NFL. He kind of has that New York personality. He wants to win. He's upset when the Giants lose 4 or 5 straight games. I think it motivates him for the next season to turn it around quick. But he's adventurous in so many ways that he's going to take off with the ball and drop his shoulder instead of sliding or run out of bounds. But that's probably the type of football players he's been his whole life. And you got to risk it for reward, I guess. So I'm not bashing on Dart because he's turning into a fantastic quarterback. I think he makes it work. Beck has said some things that, people take a step back and they're like, whoa, whoa. but I do think he cares about his teammates. He cares about football. He might not show it while he's playing. He's very, I don't know. When he's in the huddle, he's very mellow to me, but he does wear his frustrations on his sleeves, and they pour out sometimes when there's a bad pass and stuff like that. Yeah, and I think there's some things that he can prove, some things he can change, and we'll see if he's able to do it. Mark Fletcher, another great story just on the Miami side. I don't want to say great story; it's a sad story, but he feeds off it. So his father passed away in 2024. He'll text his father, so he kept the old cell phone so that he still had his father's number, and he texts his dad on Saturday mornings before games or on game day in the morning or when he's going through a hard time in life, and it kind of gives him some inspiration because he looked up to his dad. And I'm happy he had a excellent game, and he just had an awesome playoff, and now he's on the map. He's Miami continues to feed him the ball next season. He'll be an early pick, I think. 17 carries last night, 112 yards, 2 touchdowns. I actually made a TikTok video a few weeks ago about Mark Fletcher, and some of the Miami fans tried to come at me and say, yeah, he's not even our top running back, all that stuff, because people just like to be controversial on those apps. But if you watched him in the Texas A&M game, I should say, and I know Miami fans watched him, and I don't know why they were so hesitant about him because he was just dominant. He was hard to bring down. There was people trailing him while trying to tackle him, sliding with him. Like it took 3, 4, 5 guys to bring him down, and it just continued. And he's very patient with the ball. He'll wait until a hole develops, and then he just takes off. And he did that last night for the touchdown. So Mark Fletcher had 2 touchdowns on 112 yards. And at the time, there was a cool stat from ESPN. They were saying Miami is looking to become the third school to win a BCS CFP championship after trailing by 10 plus points entering the fourth quarter. The first team being Clemson, they trailed 24-14, ended up winning 35-31. That was in 2017. And actually, back to back games, Alabama trailed in 2018, 20-10, and won 26-23. So yeah, I think Fletcher's story is just beginning. I am going to root for this guy. I saw after the game, he went back out during the celebration and found Fernando Mendoza and congratulated him and kind of took everything in. And that makes me remember several years ago when Michigan lost to TCU in the college football playoff semifinal, and they all sat out there. JJ McCarthy, Donovan Edwards. There was a receiver that ended up going to Oklahoma, but they kind of sat out there during the celebration and took it in. And I think that fueled them. It showed that we're here for the long haul. We want to win. And kind of that's what happened with Mark Fletcher last night. I know there was a negative clip going around of him taking a swing at an Indiana player. I've seen some mixed reports about it. I don't want to put false reports out there. There are people saying that the Indiana player said something about his father. I hope that's not true. We like to think that sportsmanship's happening at all times, but in competition, people say things that they might regret later. This is just like one of those like unforgivable things. You're going to talk about someone's, deceased father, but that's not confirmed. So I'm not going to put that out there with the Indiana player. But yeah, let's talk one more player or two more players for Miami. Malachi Tony, 10 catches, 122 yards, and one hell of a touchdown. He just, like I said earlier, he makes, these plays where, he's speeding across, he catches the ball, he has open field, and then all of a sudden the secondary's closing in on him. You think he's going to get dragged down, and then he just keeps going, and somehow he slips through for a touchdown. He's so elusive. He's so fast. He's, to me, the most exciting player in college football to watch. Like when you get the ball in his hands, like, you just sit back and say, all right, here we go. Something's going to happen. Fireworks are about to go off. And when we recorded our preview, we said, get Tony the ball. 12 to 15 times is the magic number. I think they did get him the ball 13 times. He had 10 catches. I believe he had 3 rushes. Just wasn't enough. And they came close. They could have won this game. A little bit better play from Beck, and Miami's, celebrating. So Malachi Tony set a new Miami single season record, 1,211 rushing yards, the most all purpose yards in a single season by a wide receiver with 1,622 yards, and tied for most touchdowns responsible for in a single season by a wide receiver with 13 touchdowns. Malachi Tony in the first half, a little silent, 3 catches, 11 yards. In the second half, 6 catches for 104 yards and a touchdown. Tony gained, this was at the time that he had 115 yards. He had 101 of them were after the catch. He's great. He's the next Jeremiah Smith type. Him and Jeremiah Smith are going to go back and forth next year for best wide receiver in college football. Tony has every door open for him. It's so exciting. Like, he's going to be a first round pick, and an NFL team's going to be lucky to have Tony. Ruben Bain, 8 tackles and a sack. And I was watching him at one point, and I was like, how could someone be so big in the nicest way, like strong, and be so fast? That is a bus coming at you. And he laid some vicious hits last night. And the offensive tackle for Indiana wanted nothing to do with him at times. He was getting untouched. He was just so fast off the snap. It was unbelievable to watch it. And he was great during this college football playoff. And all year, everybody, I think at one point, had him in the Heisman Trophy hunt. He's getting talked about being a top 10 pick. He should be a top 10 pick. But I think people had question marks because they look at stats at times and they're like, all right, he didn't have the sacks. The numbers didn't follow him. But I think the reason people put him in the conversation, it was because of what we saw last night. He's so good. If you just watch him, you're like, that's guy's going to be unbelievable in the NFL. He's going to have a long NFL career if he can stay healthy. And he was great. The block punt, I don't even want to get into that. That was New Jersey's own missing that block, but they just went right through them. He gave like a little like half-assed push, and then they blocked the punt for a touchdown. That was a big momentum swinger right there. But Curt Cignetti is the first head coach to win a national championship within his first 2 seasons out of school since Gene Chizik in 2010 at Auburn. Hats off to Cignetti. It's unreal what he was able to do. To go in there, he kind of did the Deion Sanders thing, but the proper way, where he went into the locker room and said, I'm going to bring in my own players, my guys, the guys I think I can win with. And he did that. And it wasn't necessarily the biggest stars in college football. It wasn't the 4-star, 5-star recruits, but he pulled together a team that he knew he could coach, that was going to give him his all, or their all. They were going to work their butts off each and every day, and they were going to take on the identity of Curt Cignetti. And he's all business. Like, this entire playoff, like, the camera would pan off to him, and he would have this very serious face on, even when they were up by, 20, 30 points, or they just scored a touchdown or something. I'm happy he was able to finally look relieved last night. He was able to finally celebrate. You saw the smile on his face. We got the true Cignetti, where the awesome interviews, and that's what his personality has become. And he'll say anything. He's uncensored during these interviews. The Big Ten has now won 3 straight national championships for the first time in more than 80 years. The last time it happened, 1940 Minnesota, 1941 Minnesota, and 1942 Ohio State. Now we have Michigan 2023, Ohio State 2024, Indiana 2025. Last stat for you. Indiana did not lose a fumble over its final 1,047 offensive plays in 15 games, only losing a fumble in the first quarter of its season opener. No other team since 2004 has gone more than 12 plus consecutive games in a season without losing a fumble. I don't know what to even say about that stat. That blows my mind. Oh my God. 139 years. Indiana finally has a championship. Congrats, Hoosiers. You have your championship. Thank you to anyone who listened to this episode. I hope you've been enjoying the college football conversation. We're now going to be shifting the focus over to NFL draft. We might talk about some off-season headlines like early top 25, look at some of these new rosters now that the portal is starting to come to a close. Spring ball's not too far off. So a lot's going to be coming your way. But I really appreciate the support. Head over to our YouTube page under further review if you search on YouTube. Give us a subscription. We appreciate it. It just goes such a long way when you do that. But give us a follow on Instagram. Check out our TikTok. Occasionally, I'll use the Twitter page. So anywhere you can find us and join the conversation, it makes me excited. I love doing this. I'm a big fan of college football. Always have been ever since a young age. And you know, I just want to connect with some other college football fans. One last note, I actually have a cool interview coming up. I'm not going to drop the name yet, but I'm in the middle of confirming it. It should be confirmed soon, but I can't wait to get that out there. I'm going to get some cool interviews during the offseason. I promise you that. So stick around. It's going to be worth your time. Appreciate you guys tuning in tonight and enjoy, the rest of your week. Take care.